Okay, so now I want to talk about how Walmart grew. And if you're watching this video, you probably don't like Walmart all that much because they destroyed the urban fabric. Their sourcing techniques have destroyed you know manufacturing, and they've made their money by basically gutting the social fabric of wherever they can get a foothold. And it costs, the thing is, this is one of the big challenges that now finally people are beginning to talk about this. I was one of those, nuts trying to fight NAFTA during the Clinton era, NAFTA and giving China most favored trade status. And why? Because the U.S. had built up over 100 years of struggle, the values of a clean environment, clean air and clean water. People fought because things had been terrible, rivers catching on fire and things like that, and much worse. So the struggle has always been the people versus the certain corporations that were willing to, what you might say, externalize the cost. So I think I've mentioned a quarter of the plastic pollution in the ocean is caused by just one company, the Coca-Cola company. Now, who's paying to clean that up? That costs everybody. If the oceans die, that costs everybody. And the Coca-Cola company is just getting a free ride, dumping their, creating a whole notion of society that in the end is killing us. But this is the era to start turning that around, right? More people would rather work on, if they get paid, they would rather work on solving the problem rather than being a part of the problem. But that's the trick I've been working on my whole life. Like, I've figured out a way to eke out a living in these fields ever since I was 23 when I started my first environmental business. And I'm 64 now as I'm doing this video. So eking out a living for 40 years is, not everybody's into that. Most people would rather okay, look, I want to save the environment, but I got to feed my family. And we want to eliminate that conflict, right? We want to eliminate the conflict between doing good and getting paid. And so I've been working on that my whole life, and I feel like I'm on my best iteration. So now let's learn, how did Walmart do it? And the initial idea, the funny thing is, the initial idea of Walmart, you could see it was a valid idea. And so Sam Walton, the founder, lived in a little tiny town called Bentonville, Arkansas. That's where the headquarters now are. And he noticed that the prices that people, he would go to Little Rock, which was the big city in Arkansas. And, I don't even know if it's even today, if it's in the top 20 cities in the United States. But anyway, it was, the biggest city in Arkansas, which is a Midwestern town in the United States. State. Arkansas is a Midwestern state in the United States. Okay. So he noticed that the prices of commodity goods like milk were a lot cheaper in the big cities, and that he felt like the people in the rural areas, that they were getting price gouged on the things that they had to buy that they couldn't really grow themselves. And he really analyzed the issue, and he also knew just how tight things are when you're living in the country, how much people really need to stretch their money. And he figured that if he could save people a nickel on a gallon of milk, that he would basically corner the whole market in whatever city he was in. So he started a store, and he just did whatever it would take to get those keystone products a nickel less than Woolworths, or any of the other stores. I think Woolworths was the kind of big chain of the era that was essentially, putting premium prices on the goods they sold in the rural areas, and where there was competition, they lowered them in the cities. So that was the basic premise: give people stuff a little cheaper, and they'll buy it. Unfortunately, that turned into basically cheapness at any cost. And again, so the destruction of the downtowns of small towns across America initiated by this idea, that's a huge externalization of costs. And now in the United States, there's almost no food. Like you can go to small town after small town and there's no groceries to be had. Like the closest thing to a grocery store is going to be like you go to a gas station, you can buy some Cliff Bars and applesauce. And I was in 2022, I was riding my bike west across the United States, and I was shocked because I had done the same thing in 1980, and the food supply in all these little towns was some of the best food you could find. And instead, I was really struggling to get anything to eat. It was one of the reasons I stopped my ride early. It was just so hard to get food because what had happened is Walmart and some of the other big chains in the US, like maybe you've heard of a company called Kroger, what they were doing is they were putting, what they've done is they've put these mega stores in a place, instead of having local stores that you could walk to in these small towns, they said, well, let's put a mega store and put it within 30 minutes to an hour drive, and kind of they use some kind of logistics planning to serve a large area with a big store. But the problem with that is you can't get there without driving. Many of these places are totally inaccessible. And let's say you're retired, you've farmed your whole life, and now you're living in the town near the farm, or you're still living on your farm, and you want to get your daily produce or your weekly produce even, you've got to get in a car. Not people can drive. Not everyone can afford a car in these places. So you've created essentially a food crisis. And in a lot of places in the United States, the only so-called food is from a chain called the Dollar Store or Dollar Tree. And what they call food is just packaged garbage. I've seen some of these places where you're getting cookies imported from China. That's how bad things have gotten with the whole network of subsidies and whatnot. Okay, but I'm getting kind of far afield, but that's the end. That's sort of the, where we are now from this idea of Walmart basically figuring that they could dominate all these markets just by really kind of acing the distribution game. And of course, as China became more and more open, and China had no environmental or social regulations like the United States, as a result, the cost to produce goods there was so cheap that it rationalized shipping container loads across the ocean instead of just making stuff in the United States. And so that's why, how the US economy got gutted, and the middle class has basically been declining in the US ever since. So you can see why there's a lot of nationalism these days. People are sick of having their jobs just shipped overseas because a few people are able to essentially exploit exploit the system. And that was a kind of arbitrage. Basically, what we're looking at, the whole world economy has been arbitraged by a relatively small number of players to maximize their own personal wealth and minimize the actual value provided to society. So, okay, so that's a long windup, but how do we get around that? How do we start reversing this and create livable cities? Okay, so what did Walmart do? Walmart would go into a town, and I fought one Walmart, and my mom had been involved in one as well, but they go into a town and they don't buy the land, they find land that is not zoned properly for a Walmart store. Because in general, no land in these small towns is originally zoned for these giant stores. And just as an aside, when they leave the towns, they leave this black box, I think that's what they call it, that nobody requires them to actually formally close their stores. They just leave these abandoned monoliths in these small towns, and the parking lots. It's just a wasteland. But before they do that, what they do is they buy options. An option is where you pay a little bit that gives you the right to purchase something later. So they go to some farmer and they say, hey, we'll buy, 40 acres from you. Or we'd like to buy some options to buy your land. And the farmer goes, well, but what are you going to do with it? It's zoned farming. It's not zoned commercial. They say, don't worry, give us 5 years or give us 3 years, and we're going to, when those options come due, we're going to pay you a hell of a lot more than the market rate for your land. And so the farmer says, okay. And so they take the small amount of cash, relatively small, which could still be quite a lot for the farmer, and the farmer can keep farming that land to pay for the option to buy. Now, using their superior wealth, they work the city council and they keep unelecting the people who care about the city and replacing them with people, on their payroll, more or less, and when they get enough, the majority of the votes on the city council, then they rezone the land. And they say, how about let's rezone this land to commercial? Suddenly, commercially zoned land is just way more valuable because the government, in every part of the world, government regulations really create different kinds of markets and distort the markets according to the priorities of the government. And the priorities of the government are typically the priorities of whoever represents the wealthy and powerful interests. So over time, Walmart as they acquired more wealth and power, became better and better at doing these land conversions, converting the zoning from farming to commercial. Now the land is worth a ton, and they also have the right to construct now. So this is how it works. I'm not even complaining. See, if we fall into the complaining mindset, well, that they're corrupt or whatever, as soon as you call other human beings corrupt, you're really in trouble, because all human beings, we've all got our problems, and we're also very survival oriented, and our survival orientation leads us to the more selfish parts of our character that was given to us by the Creator. So why? Because survival was more important than anything else. And now, because we've won the survival game, at least in the Western countries, people don't just stop and say, well, now let's really maximize the benefit for everybody. Let's keep going. I still need to be number one, that kind of drive toward being alpha. And that's so embedded in the animal kingdom. I mean, again, if you look at the, I don't know what you call them, a tribe of walruses. I'm not a very good biologist in that way, but I've observed the notion, the alpha male walrus basically gets to have sex with all the female walruses, and the other males just have to sit and watch, like they're shut out. And human beings have that part of our DNA just sort of drives us to create that kind of alphaism. So if we're sitting in, you can complain all you want. It's not going to change our DNA. But, the beautiful thing about human beings is we do have the possibility to work together in community. I see that happening where people, often it's the more mature cultures, the more indigenous cultures who have worked out how to live with each other and how to be more powerful as a community than as a kind of alpha top down. So we're going to be constantly addressing these kind of issues. When I say we, humanity, and I too, because over the past 20 years, I kept on looking, how do we create a business that is not predicated on domination and domineering behaviors? I'm not saying there's not going to be an alpha, but because people still want leadership. People, just like when you have a family of children, if you're the father or the mother, the children want you to lead. Children do not want to lead the family. So we can look at society at large, and people like leaders. They want people to help solve the problem and chart the path. And depending on who you listen to, a lot of people really don't aspire to leadership, and that's probably good, because if too many people in charge, you could say, everyone's charting a different course, that's be chaotic. Rather, and again, this is not to rationalize any kind of horrid behavior, but not everyone wants the trouble of being responsible for other people. That's why there aren't that many billionaires. Not that many people really want to take responsibility for the allocation of other people's wealth the way most billionaires do, as we've discussed in some earlier videos. So how do you reverse this? How do you create a livable city? Well, same way Walmart did, but in using that idea differently. So now that they've ruined, now that especially in the United States and Canada, that our cities have become basically unlivable hellholes, with the car being the dominant design factor of everything. And it's so expensive. I mean, if you really look at some of these videos, you'll see that there's not enough money to keep such an unecological design afloat much longer. And so these designs are terrible, and as a result, the value of housing in a lot of these urban cores is just terrible. And there's no amenities. But the thing is, we know from looking, say, like when I lived in Washington, D.C., whenever the government said we're going to open up a new subway station, all the land around that subway stop and the housing just exploded in value. So it would be good if you could buy a bunch of homes, before anyone else knew that there was going to be a subway stop, and then they build it, everything goes up, and you renovate and you sell. So now we look at that thing and we look at how Walmart worked. And if we were to put together a fund, for example, a fund to buy up urban forests that still exist, that haven't been turned into condos yet. Or, if we said we want to make this city, we're going to work to make this city transit friendly, pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, world-class urban transit. It takes money to do that. So rather than waiting to have something kind of grow like Walmart did, Walmart was basically, in the beginning, kind of a bootstrapped operation, then added finance and grew and grew. But it would be a lot faster to assemble a fund. Let's say you wanted to transform one city, raise capital, create a real estate holding company, and buy up the properties that are cheap where there's no amenities yet, then work the government to create amenities to make the whole place more livable. And if you look around, when I grew up, I was middle class, but I lived on the edge of a wealthy community. Wealthy people like trees. They like things like that, and they're willing to pay a premium on their housing to have access to amenities like nature or like walkability and things like that. So if we're looking at that price differential between a home with no amenities in the area of transit, or if you could buy a bunch of land and create a park and all of the property around that park. Think of Central Park. What are the most expensive properties in Manhattan? The ones that are across the street from Central Park. So the more park you make, the more money you can make on the real estate. And this is a good argument for creating more wilderness areas. If you go out west and you look, people, they want to have homes as close as they can to the wilderness areas or national parks where they could walk out their door. Certainly, if you think of golfing communities, which, I'm not a golfer, I don't think golf courses are really very ecological, but the same basic idea, the whole golf development idea is go get a big bunch of land, put a really popular amenity in the center of it, and then build a bunch of houses, and the value of everything goes up because amenity values are real. And this is why there's financial opportunities to clean up pollution. I'm just going to throw one last thing out. If you're industrious, I lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand for 9 months in 2019 and early 2020. And in early 2020, I got hit with what they call the burning season. And so for about 4 or 5 months, this beautiful city, it's such a livable city, but you can't live there. Most people with any ability to move, they go south. They just leave the town for that. And it's an eminently it's a solvable problem, but it takes money. But the thing is that imagine how much the economy in Chiang Mai would boom if the smoke was stopped. And it's basically burning of agricultural waste, which is, there are solutions to that. It's just the people who are burning can't afford them, but using financing, it would be possible to provide that kind of service in a communitarian way. There's all kinds of people working on solutions, but when I was there, I discovered nobody really was talking about how to actually fund the transformation they wanted. So, and I spoke with people. I spoke with the head of one of the biggest 5-star hotels there, and he said, yeah, this smoking season is costing the tourist industry, and especially the hotels, literally $100 million a year of lost revenue. And then the same thing with the hospital system, which was heavily subsidized by the government. That was another 100 million. Now imagine you had $200 million of cash flow to play with. Let's cut it in half because you need to leave some of the benefits to the people. But you can finance billions of dollars with that kind of opportunity. You take out a giant loan or a big equity fund and then come up with solutions where, like, if the hotel was going to benefit, if the hotel system was going to gain $100 million a year of new cash flow because the air is clean, how much of that would they be willing to pay to finance that transformation? Now, these are not easy projects, but they're certainly doable. It requires shoes on the ground. We used to call it shoe leather. Like, if you're a leader, you need to be able to afford to walk around, have the conversations with other leaders and with all the constituents that are involved. Go out to the rural areas, really figure out what these people need in order to stop burning. And after a while, with enough of that, suddenly a solution can emerge. And because, that's why I studied financing, because I knew that solutions are available, but I could see even, from the very get-go in 2000, that no one who cared about the environment understood hardly anything about how to finance things in a regularized basis, in a regularized way. And even more so, and this is why I've created the Make My Nut program, is just to be able to fund people to walk around and do the hard work of bringing people together and creating a unified plan. If you're living in a city that's got some kind of seemingly intractable problem, book a call with me and I'll show you how to get paid every day, every month, to be the leader of solving that problem without having to subsidize that with, a day job or, selling, bake sales or any of that stuff. And so that's how you get started. First you've got to get paid to be a leader. Then, with that revenue or enough revenue for your team to go really study the problem, then you can learn about exactly where in the system can you apply a solution to rectify the whole problem. And these are, again, there's just trillions of dollars of opportunity to clean up the air all around the world, to get the garbage out of our rivers and oceans. I mean, these are unlimited financial opportunities. So Walmart saw a big opportunity, but these are even bigger. And I don't feel like fighting Walmart. I don't want to spend my time being opposed to somebody. I want to be spending my life with people who are for just a better aesthetic and future. And these opportunities are really on the horizon. They've never been more clear to me than today. So I hope if you've listened this far, I hope you'll, go to my website and sign up for a call and let's talk about getting you involved. All right, talk to you later.